In the shadowy world of Hollywood legacies, sometimes being the daughter of a legend puts a target on your back. The agents thought she would be an easy mark, just another privileged Hollywood kid riding on her father's fame. They couldn't have been more wrong. While they meticulously planned their trap, Rebecca Hackman was already 3 steps ahead, watching them from the shadows. Comment where you're watching from today as we dive into this incredible story of deception, quick thinking, and the power of a legacy that runs deeper than fame. The California sun beat down on the exclusive Malibu neighborhood where Rebecca Hackman had built a life carefully separated from her father's spotlight. At 42, she had established herself as a respected private investigator, specializing in cases that involved the entertainment industry's darker side. Unlike many Hollywood offspring, Rebecca shunned publicity, preferring the anonymity that allowed her to move undetected through both high society and its underbelly. Her modest office sat above a coffee shop in Santa Monica, its windows tinted to prevent prying eyes from seeing the extensive security system and carefully organized case files within. That Tuesday morning began like any other. Rebecca arrived early, reviewing case notes while sipping her black coffee. The call came shortly after 9. A prospective client, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, claimed to have sensitive information about a threat to several high-profile entertainment families. He requested a meeting that afternoon, insisting it couldn't wait. Something in his voice triggered Rebecca's finely tuned instincts. 20 years in the business had taught her to recognize the subtle tells of deception. "I'd be happy to meet," she replied evenly, "but I'll need some preliminary information first." She listened as the man hesitated, then offered vague details about worried studio executives and potential blackmail schemes. Rebecca noted how he emphasized certain points about security protocols and her own methods of investigation. Questions that seemed innocent, but were fishing for her operational procedures. By the time she hung up, Rebecca had already decided to run a background check on this mysterious Mr. Wilson. A search through her extensive databases revealed nothing. No social media presence, no property records, no connection to the studio he claimed to represent. A ghost. In her world, people who don't exist on paper usually exist for very specific, often dangerous reasons. Rebecca reached for her secure phone and dialed her most trusted contact at the LAPD. "Mark, I need you to run a voice print analysis." She played back the recorded call. Within an hour, her suspicions were confirmed. The voice belonged to a known identity broker with ties to several intelligence agencies. This was no ordinary client. Rather than cancel the meeting, Rebecca decided to play along. If someone was trying to set her up, she wanted to know why. The coffee shop 2 blocks from her office would provide the perfect venue, public enough to deter violence, equipped with her own surveillance devices, and staffed by a barista who had once been her client and knew to alert her if anything seemed off. Rebecca arrived early, securing a corner table with a clear view of both entrances. She wore a simple blue blouse and jeans, nothing that would attract attention, but the small pendant around her neck contained a high-resolution camera. A quick scan of the room revealed 3 men who didn't quite fit the usual coffee shop crowd. 2 alert, 2 deliberate in their casualness. 1 by the window, another near the restrooms, and a 3rd at the counter pretending to work on a laptop. None looked directly at her, but she felt their awareness like a physical presence. When Mr. Wilson finally entered, Rebecca immediately recognized him as the man from the laptop. Average height, forgettable features, expensive watch, partially hidden under a shirt cuff. His approach was carefully measured, his smile practiced. Everything about him screamed professional operative. "Ms. Hackman, thank you for meeting me." His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct but not challenging. "I hope I didn't alarm you with my urgency earlier." "Not at all," Rebecca replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm always interested in helping studio executives protect their interests." She emphasized the words slightly, watching for his reaction. There it was, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. He knew she was probing his cover story. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in conversational chess. With each question, Rebecca led him deeper into his fabricated scenario, noting every inconsistency. He claimed to represent Paramount, but referenced Warner executives. He mentioned security concerns at events that didn't exist. Most tellingly, he repeatedly steered the conversation toward her father. I understand discretion is your specialty, Wilson said, leaning forward slightly. Your father certainly taught Hollywood the value of privacy. Rebecca took a slow sip of her coffee. My father and I have separate careers and separate lives, Mr. Wilson. He taught me many things, but my professional ethics developed independently. Of course, Wilson retreated smoothly, but surely his connections have been valuable in your work, particularly with certain government contracts? And there it was, the true purpose of this meeting. Someone believed she had access to classified information through her father's past film consultants. Gene Hackman's meticulous research for roles had indeed brought him into contact with various agencies over the decades, but the idea that he or Rebecca had access to state secrets was absurd, unless... Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities. Her current case involved a producer whose political thriller was mysteriously shut down mid-production. The script had featured a covert operation that bore striking similarities to actual events that had never been publicly disclosed. The producer claimed the screenplay was entirely fictional, but someone clearly believed otherwise and thought the information had come through the Hackman family connections. That's an interesting theory, she said carefully, but I think there's been a misunderstanding about my work and my relationship with my father. Wilson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Perhaps, but misunderstandings can be dangerous in our line of work, wouldn't you agree? Before Rebecca could respond, her phone buzzed with a text, marked from the LAPD. Confirmed. CIA domestic OP. Get out now. Rebecca's mind shifted into high gear. 3 federal agents in a civilian setting, operating domestically without jurisdiction, trying to entrap a private citizen. Whatever game they were playing, it was outside the rules. She needed to end this meeting immediately, but do it in a way that wouldn't escalate the situation. She smiled, projecting a calm she didn't feel. You know what, Mr. Wilson? I think I need to be more direct. You're not from Paramount. Your colleagues are positioned to block the exits, and your interest in my father suggests this meeting isn't about client work at all. She lowered her voice. Whatever you think I know, you're mistaken. And whatever operation you're running here, I suspect it lacks proper authorization. Wilson's facade cracked, surprise flashing across his features before he recovered. Ms. Hackman, I think you're being paranoid. I'm simply... Save it. Rebecca cut him off, standing slowly. This meeting is over, and before you consider any aggressive moves, you should know that everything that's happened here has been recorded and transmitted to several secure locations. She gestured subtly to her pendant, including the LAPD, who are particularly interested in unauthorized federal operations on their turf. The tension in the room was palpable as Wilson weighed his options. Finally, with a slight nod to his colleagues, he stood. This isn't over, Ms. Hackman. Actually, she replied, I think it is. As she walked toward the door, the other agents made no move to stop her, but Rebecca knew this was just the opening move in a dangerous game, one where she didn't even know the stakes yet. One thing was certain, someone had severely underestimated Gene Hackman's daughter, and they were about to realize their mistake. Rebecca maintained her composed demeanor until she was 3 blocks from the coffee shop, continuously checking for surveillance as she navigated through crowded streets and narrow alleyways. Only when she was certain she wasn't being followed did she duck into an underground parking garage and retrieve the nondescript sedan she kept registered under a shell company. 20 minutes later, she pulled into the private garage beneath her Venice Beach home, a modest bungalow from the outside that concealed state-of-the-art security systems within. The moment her front door closed behind her, Rebecca activated her home's secure protocol, sealing electronic access points and initiating a sweep for surveillance devices. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline subsided, replaced by a cold, calculated anger. Federal agents had just attempted to entrap her in a public setting. The implications were disturbing on multiple levels. Rebecca moved to her home office, its walls lined with soundproofing materials and its windows equipped with signal-blocking film. From a hidden safe behind a bookshelf, she retrieved a special phone, one that couldn't be traced or hacked through conventional means. She dialed a number from memory. "It's me," she said when the line connected. "We have a situation." She detailed the coffee shop encounter, her voice growing steadier as she focused on the facts. 3 operatives, likely CIA based on Mark's confirmation. They were fishing for something connected to Dad, possibly related to the Meridian Productions case. The voice on the other end belonged to Sam Carter, a former intelligence officer who had once worked with Gene Hackman as a technical consultant on a film and had since become a trusted ally to both Hackmans. "This is highly irregular," Sam responded after a thoughtful pause. "Domestic operations require Justice Department approval. Either they're running this off the books or they have approval because they believe it's a matter of national security," Rebecca finished grimly. "Either way, I need to know what I'm dealing with." "I'll make some calls," Sam promised. "In the meantime, assume you're under surveillance. Use the protocols we established." After ending the call, Rebecca sat in silence for several minutes, mentally piecing together the puzzle. The Meridian Productions case had seemed straightforward when she took it 2 months ago. Investigate why a major studio suddenly pulled funding from a promising political thriller. The producer, Daniel Weiss, had been devastated and confused, insisting there were no budget issues or creative differences. One day, everything was proceeding on schedule. The next, executives were shutting down production and requiring everyone to sign enhanced confidentiality agreements. Rebecca had initially suspected typical Hollywood politics. Perhaps a competing studio had poached the director or lead actor. But her investigation had revealed something far stranger. The script, titled Blackwater Rising, featured a fictional CIA operation in Southeast Asia that went catastrophically wrong when agents accidentally exposed a deep cover asset. What made the script unusual was its technical accuracy regarding intelligence procedures, diplomatic protocols, and regional politics. When Rebecca questioned Weiss about his research sources, he claimed the screenplay's author had based everything on public domain information and creative imagination. The writer, a reclusive former journalist named Edward Mahoney, had delivered the script through an agent and declined interviews or meetings. Rebecca's attempts to locate Mahoney had hit dead ends. His agent insisted all communication went through encrypted channels, and the man hadn't made a public appearance in years. Now, with federal agents clearly interested in the Hackman connection to this case, Rebecca wondered if she had stumbled into something far bigger than a canceled film project. She pulled out her case notes on Meridian Productions and began reviewing them with new eyes, looking for anything that might explain why the CIA would risk an unauthorized operation to question her. Halfway through her notes, something caught her attention. In her interview with Daniel Weiss, he had mentioned that Gene Hackman was originally approached for a supporting role in Blackwater Rising, playing a veteran intelligence officer who uncovered the failed operation. Rebecca's father had declined due to his retirement from acting, but he had read the script and reportedly told Weiss it was disturbingly accurate. At the time, Rebecca had dismissed the comment as Hollywood hyperbole. Now it took on new significance. Had her father recognized something in the script that others had missed, something authentic enough to concern actual intelligence agencies? Rebecca reached for her secure phone again, hesitating before dialing. She and her father maintained a respectful distance from each other's professional lives. He had never wanted his fame to overshadow her career, and she had never traded on his name. But circumstances had changed. Someone believed there was a connection between Gene Hackman, that screenplay, and information important enough to national security to justify a CIA operation. The phone rang 4 times before Gene's familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Rebecca, twice in 1 month. Must be serious." Despite the circumstances, Rebecca smiled at her father's dry humor. At 95, he remained sharp as ever, his legendary intensity mellowed, but not diminished by age. "Hi, Dad. I need to ask you about a script you were offered. Blackwater Rising. Do you remember it?" The silence that followed told Rebecca everything she needed to know, even before her father responded. "Where are you calling from?" he asked, his tone suddenly cautious. "Secure line, secure location," she assured him. "Good." Another pause. "That script wasn't fiction, Beck." "Not entirely. When I read it, I recognized an operation from the 1980s, something that was never made public. The screenplay changed names and dates, but the core events were identical to a situation I was briefed on when researching a role for The Package. I had signed security clearances for that film, met with actual operatives. One of them told me about a botched extraction in Cambodia that cost several assets their lives. Rebecca's pulse quickened. Did you tell anyone about the similarities? Just Weiss, Jean confirmed. I warned him the material might be sensitive. He assured me his writer had solid sources, and the studio's legal team had cleared everything. He paused again. Why are you asking about this now? As succinctly as possible, Rebecca outlined the morning's events. Her father listened without interruption, but she could sense his growing concern. These people approached you because of me, he said finally, regret evident in his voice, because they think I might have shared classified information. Or because they think the screenplay author used you as a source, Rebecca countered, or because they're trying to figure out how classified information ended up in a Hollywood script. Dad, this isn't your fault, but I need to know everything you remember about that operation in Cambodia, and about the people who briefed you. Gene Hackman sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of decades-old secrets. It was 1987. The Cold War was still in full swing, but the real action had shifted to proxy conflicts. I was researching for that role as a military intelligence officer, and they arranged for me to meet some actual personnel. One night, after several drinks, this CIA officer, Tommy Fitzgerald was his name, started talking about the Cambodian disaster. He wasn't supposed to tell me, but as her father spoke, Rebecca took careful notes, recording names, dates, and locations. The operation, code-named Silver Phoenix, had involved extracting a high-level Soviet defector from Cambodia. Something went wrong. Signals were crossed, identities compromised. The defector and 3 American assets were killed. The incident was buried, official records altered to indicate a training accident elsewhere. The thing that haunted Fitzgerald, Jean continued, was his certainty that they'd been betrayed from within. He insisted someone in Langley had deliberately sabotaged the operation, but he could never prove it. Eventually, he was reassigned to a desk job, his concerns dismissed as paranoia. Jean paused. I haven't thought about this in years, but now that I'm connecting it to that screenplay, Beck, if the details in Blackwater Rising match what actually happened, someone with intimate knowledge of Silver Phoenix wrote that script. Someone who wants the truth to come out, Rebecca mused. But why now, after all these years? Because someone involved is still active, her father suggested grimly. Someone powerful enough to shut down a multi-million-dollar film production and send agents after my daughter. The implication sent a chill through Rebecca. If her father was right, she had inadvertently stepped into a decades-old cover-up involving the highest levels of intelligence services. People had already died to keep these secrets. There was little reason to think those responsible would hesitate to eliminate new threats. Dad, I think you should, Rebecca began, but a sharp beeping from her security system interrupted her. Someone had just triggered the perimeter alarm at her back gate. Simultaneously, her phone pinged with an incoming text from an unknown number. Terminate your investigation immediately. Final warning. Rebecca moved quickly to her security monitor. The camera showed 2 men in utility worker uniforms approaching her back door, their movements too purposeful, too alert to be actual workers. The CIA operatives from the coffee shop hadn't wasted any time in tracking her home address. Dad, I have to go, she said tersely. I'll call you back on a different line. Stay alert. They might approach you too. She ended the call before he could respond, already moving toward the hidden panel in her hallway that concealed an emergency exit. As she gathered essential documents and equipment, Rebecca's mind raced through her options. She couldn't go to the police. If the CIA was involved, they could block any official assistance. Her usual network of contacts might be compromised if these people had been monitoring her for some time. She needed to disappear, regroup, and figure out why a decades-old CIA operation was worth threatening Gene Hackman's daughter over. Rebecca slipped through the concealed door, just as she heard the distinct sound of her back door lock being picked. Within seconds, she was moving through a narrow passage that led to the neighboring property, a rental home whose owner had granted her emergency access rights in exchange for discounted security services. From there, she could access a different street and vanish into the sprawling anonymity of Los Angeles. One thing was certain. The undercover agents had severely underestimated her determination. They thought they were setting a trap for Gene Hackman's naive daughter. Instead, They had awakened a formidable adversary who now had every reason to uncover whatever truth they were so desperate to hide. As evening fell over Los Angeles, Rebecca moved methodically through her contingency plan, staying 3 steps ahead of her pursuers. The city's sprawling network of neighborhoods provided perfect cover as she switched vehicles twice, used cash-only transactions, and avoided surveillance cameras. By nightfall, she had secured a room at a small motel in the San Fernando Valley, registered under one of her established aliases, paying cash for 3 nights in advance. The room was basic but clean, with thick curtains that blocked any view from outside. Rebecca swept it for surveillance devices, finding none. Only then did she power up her backup laptop, a specialized machine with enhanced security features and an operating system that left no digital footprint. Her first priority was information. If she was going to counter whatever operation was targeting her, she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with. Rebecca began with Edward Mahoney, the mysterious screenwriter behind Blackwater Rising. Despite her previous failed attempts to locate him, she now had new context and higher stakes. She accessed databases not available to the general public, calling in favors from contacts in journalism and private investigation. 3 hours of intensive searching yielded surprising results. Edward Mahoney appeared to be a ghost, with no traceable history before 2010. His literary agent operated through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Tax records, when she finally accessed them, showed modest but consistent payments to a bank account that was closed 2 months ago, right around the time Meridian Productions was shut down. Not a person, Rebecca murmured to herself, a cover identity. The realization shifted her focus. If Mahoney was fabricated, who was really behind the screenplay? She returned to the script itself, which she had obtained during her initial investigation. Reading it now, with her father's revelations in mind, she picked up on details she had previously overlooked. Specific operational protocols, geographic references, even dialogue that suggested intimate knowledge of intelligence work. The writer wasn't just well-researched, they were experienced. A veteran CIA officer turned whistleblower, perhaps? Or someone else connected to the failed Cambodia operation who wanted the truth exposed. Rebecca's thoughts were interrupted by a secure message from Sam Carter. TF died 2019 Georgetown. Official, heart attack, rumors, otherwise, last posting, internal affairs. Watch your back. Tommy Fitzgerald, the agent who had confided in her father about the Cambodian disaster. Dead under potentially suspicious circumstances, and his final assignment was in internal affairs, investigating wrongdoing within the agency itself. The connection couldn't be coincidental. Rebecca searched for information on Fitzgerald's death, finding only a brief obituary that mentioned his 35 years of government service and his survivors, a wife, 2 children, and 5 grandchildren. No mention of suspicious circumstances, but that would be expected if someone had arranged his heart attack. She noted the wife's name, Eleanor Fitzgerald, still living in Alexandria, Virginia. On impulse, Rebecca did a deep search on Eleanor Fitzgerald, tracking her financial activities post-husband's death. Most seemed routine until Rebecca spotted an anomaly, a series of significant donations to a small literary foundation that specialized in promoting truth in journalism and fiction. The foundation, in turn, had connections to the literary agency that represented Edward Mahoney. "Got you," Rebecca whispered. Tommy Fitzgerald hadn't gone quietly to his grave. He had prepared his revenge, using his wife to funnel information to a writer who could disguise classified truths as fiction, bypassing the secrecy agreements that had constrained Fitzgerald during his lifetime. But if Rebecca had figured this out, others likely had as well. Eleanor Fitzgerald could be in danger. Rebecca reached for her secure phone, then hesitated. Any attempt to contact Mrs. Fitzgerald might simply draw attention to the woman if she wasn't already under surveillance. Instead, Rebecca composed a carefully worded email to one of her contacts in federal law enforcement, suggesting that Eleanor Fitzgerald might need protection without explaining why. Next, she turned her attention to identifying the CIA operatives who had approached her. The coffee shop's surveillance cameras would have captured clear images, which she could run through facial recognition software. But accessing those recordings would take time she didn't have. Rebecca began compiling a list of current senior intelligence officials who had been active during the late 1980s. The list was shorter than she expected, Only a handful of individuals had survived the numerous administration changes and agency restructurings to remain in positions of influence. Among them, one name stood out, Deputy Director Marshall Hayden, whose early career included Southeast Asian operations during exactly the time frame in question. A quick search revealed that Hayden was scheduled to retire in 3 months after a distinguished career spanning 4 decades. His official biography highlighted his contributions to counterterrorism post 9/11, but made only passing reference to his earlier fieldwork. More telling was a recent interview where he emphasized the importance of discretion regarding historical operations that modern audiences might misinterpret without proper context. She was getting close to something significant, something worth risking an unauthorized domestic operation over. Rebecca's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her father. Secure location established. Need to meet. Details follow. Moments later, coordinates came through for a location in Ojai, about 90 minutes from Los Angeles. Her father had maintained a small, unmarked property there for decades, a retreat few people knew about. As she prepared to move again, Rebecca considered reaching out to Daniel Weiss, the producer who had hired her. He deserved to know why his project had been shut down and might have additional information, but contacting him could put him in danger if he wasn't already. She decided to wait until she had spoken with her father and developed a clearer strategy. Outside, the neon motel sign cast alternating red and blue shadows across the parking lot as Rebecca packed her essential equipment. The CIA operatives had made a critical error in their approach. Instead of intimidating her into backing down, they had confirmed she was onto something significant. Now, Rebecca Hackman was fully committed to uncovering the truth, not just for her client's sake, but for her own. Someone had tried to use her father's reputation against her, and that mistake would cost them dearly. The daughter of Gene Hackman had inherited more than just his name. She had his tenacity, his attention to detail, and his unwavering commitment to justice. The undercover agents had set their trap for the wrong person, and now they would face the consequences of their miscalculation. Dawn was breaking over the Santa Ynez Mountains as Rebecca navigated the winding roads toward Ojai. She had taken a deliberately circuitous route, changing vehicles once more at a prearranged location where an old colleague had left a weathered pickup truck with untraceable plates. The morning fog provided additional cover, shrouding the landscape in a ghostly gray veil that reduced visibility and deterred casual observation. Gene Hackman's retreat was accessible only via a narrow dirt road that branched off from an already remote highway. The property itself, 5 acres of rugged terrain surrounding a modest cabin, was registered to a long-established trust with no obvious connection to the Hackman name. As Rebecca approached, she executed the security protocol her father had established years ago. 3 short honks, a pause, then 1 long. The cabin door opened immediately, revealing the unmistakable silhouette of her father. Despite the circumstances, Rebecca felt a wave of reassurance at the sight of him. Even in his 90s, Gene Hackman maintained the commanding presence that had defined his legendary career. Age had slowed his movements, but not diminished his sharp intelligence or determination. He ushered her inside quickly, securing 3 separate locks behind them. "You weren't followed?" he asked, his famous voice even more gravelly with age. "No," Rebecca confirmed, setting down her equipment. "I took every precaution." The cabin's interior was spartanly furnished but well equipped, with a functional kitchen, comfortable seating, and, most importantly, a secure communication setup that rivaled Rebecca's own. Gene had never fully explained his insistence on maintaining this level of security throughout his retirement, but Rebecca now wondered if it was connected to the secrets he had accumulated during his decades of research for various roles. "I've made some calls," Gene said, pouring coffee for both of them. "Called in favors from people who owe me. The operation targeting you is definitely off the books. No official sanction, no paperwork. That means whoever's running it is vulnerable." Rebecca nodded, accepting the steaming mug. "I've identified Deputy Director Marshall Hayden as our most likely candidate. He was active in Southeast Asia during the right time frame. He's retiring soon, and he'd have the authority to mobilize resources without too many questions." "Hayden," Gene repeated thoughtfully. "The name's familiar. I think he might have been present during some of my research sessions for the package. Younger than, of course, not senior staff. Dark hair, intense eyes, very ambitious." That fits his official photos, Rebecca confirmed, and it would explain the personal connection to the Cambodia operation. If he was involved and something went wrong, something that could tarnish his legacy as he heads into retirement. He'd have powerful motivation to keep it buried, Jean finished, but that still doesn't explain how those details ended up in a screenplay after all these years. Fitzgerald was haunted by that operation, Jean recalled. He truly believed they'd been betrayed by someone inside, someone who advanced their career while others took the fall. If he spent years gathering evidence and then arranged for it to be released after his death, he shook his head admiringly. That's a long game for justice. A game that puts his widow in danger, Rebecca pointed out. And now us. Jean's expression hardened, a glimpse of the intensity that had made him such a compelling screen presence. I've been keeping secrets for other people my entire career, Beck. Studio executives, directors, actors who needed their private lives protected. I signed confidentiality agreements for my research that I've honored for decades. But I never agreed to cover up American operatives being sacrificed to protect someone's career advancement. Rebecca studied her father. You want to help expose this, don't you? Even knowing the risks. I'm 95 years old, Jean said with a slight smile. My reputation is established. What are they going to do? Revoke my Oscars? Besides, I've always believed that power should answer to truth. If Hayden betrayed his own people and covered it up for 40 years, that truth deserves to come out. Rebecca couldn't help but admire her father's principles, even as she worried about the potential consequences. We need concrete evidence linking Hayden to the Cambodia betrayal, something that would stand up to scrutiny and couldn't be dismissed as the fabrications of a screenwriter or the faulty memory of an elderly actor. Fitzgerald must have had something, Jean reasoned. He wouldn't have gone to all this trouble without solid proof. The screenplay is just the delivery mechanism. The evidence has to be hidden somewhere accessible to the right people. Rebecca considered this. The screenplay itself might contain clues, something that would lead investigators to physical evidence if the story gained enough attention. She retrieved her laptop and pulled up the Blackwater Rising script. Together, they began analyzing it scene by scene, looking for anything that might serve as a coded message or reference. An hour later, they found what they were looking for in a seemingly inconsequential scene where the protagonist visits Arlington National Cemetery. The script described a specific sequence of headstones the character passes, with unusual emphasis on their details. When Rebecca ran the names through a database of actual Arlington burials, they matched real graves, all belonging to operatives who had died in Southeast Asia during the relevant time period. That's it, she breathed. Fitzgerald must have left evidence at Arlington, perhaps in a container hidden near one of these graves, something physical that would corroborate the screenplay's allegations. Jean nodded slowly. It makes sense. A public location that's also sacred ground, with security that would deter casual vandalism, but allow for discreet visitation. The screenplay would lead investigators there after it became public. But now we have a problem, Rebecca said. Arlington is on the opposite coast, and we're being hunted. Moreover, Hayden knows about the screenplay's contents. He must have had it analyzed thoroughly before shutting down production. He may have already secured whatever evidence was hidden there. Jean considered this, then shook his head. I don't think so. Hayden would be extremely cautious about being seen anywhere near those graves. It would create exactly the connection he's trying to avoid. More likely, he's focused on suppressing the screenplay and intimidating anyone connected to it, like Daniel Weiss and you. Speaking of Weiss, Rebecca said, I need to warn him. If they approached me, they've certainly approached him. Use my secure line, Jean suggested. It routes through multiple servers and can't be easily traced. Rebecca dialed Weiss's number, tension building as it rang repeatedly without answer. Finally, his voicemail activated. Daniel, it's Rebecca Hackman. You're in danger because of Blackwater Rising. The screenplay contains real classified information that powerful people want suppressed. Go somewhere safe and contact me through a secure channel. Trust no one who approaches you about this matter. She ended the call, hoping her warning wasn't too late. Rebecca nodded grimly. We need to reach Eleanor Fitzgerald and get to Arlington before Hayden realizes what we're after. If we can secure Fitzgerald's evidence, we can take this to people I trust in the Justice Department. people with enough authority to launch an official investigation, even against a deputy director. Jean's weathered face showed both concern and determination. I might be able to help with transportation. I still have friends in the industry with private jets who ask no questions. As they began formulating their cross-country plan, Rebecca reflected on the irony of the situation. The undercover agents had approached her thinking she was merely trading on her father's name, a pampered Hollywood offspring who could be easily intimidated. They couldn't have been more wrong. The connection between Gene Hackman and his daughter wasn't just familial. It was a shared commitment to truth that had defined both their careers. Now, that connection would become their greatest strength in exposing a decades-old betrayal that had cost American lives and corrupted the highest levels of intelligence leadership. The private jet banked gently as it approached Dulles International Airport, its smooth descent belying the tension inside the cabin. Rebecca sat across from her father, both of them reviewing their strategy for the next crucial phase of their investigation. The flight had been arranged through one of Gene's longtime friends in the industry, a director who owned a production company with several aircraft and who had asked no questions when the actor requested an urgent, discreet flight to Washington. Once we land, we'll have approximately 3 hours before Hayden's people might reasonably track our arrival, Rebecca calculated, checking her watch. The facial recognition systems at major airports all feed into federal databases. Even with our precautions, we have to assume they'll be alerted eventually. Gene nodded, his expression contemplative. I've been thinking about our Arlington approach. We can't simply walk up to those graves and start searching without attracting attention. Cemetery staff, security cameras, other visitors, all potential witnesses or obstacles. I've considered that, Rebecca replied, retrieving a folder from her bag. Arlington conducts over 20 funeral services on an average weekday. I've identified one scheduled for 1,400 hours in a section adjacent to our target area. We'll pose as mourners who've arrived early and are paying respects at nearby graves while waiting. Gene raised an eyebrow, impressed by his daughter's thoroughness. And if we're questioned? I have identification and backstory prepared for both of us, she assured him, passing him a slim envelope containing credentials that would withstand casual scrutiny. Nothing elaborate. Distant family friends of the deceased. Simple enough to be believable, forgettable enough not to stand out. The jet touched down precisely on schedule, taxiing to a private hangar where a nondescript sedan awaited them. Rebecca took the wheel, navigating with practiced efficiency through Northern Virginia's congested roadways while Gene continuously scanned for surveillance. Their conversation remained minimal, both acutely aware that time was their most precious and limited resource. Arlington National Cemetery emerged before them, hallowed ground stretching across 639 acres of gentle slopes, adorned with over 400,000 white headstones in perfect alignment. They parked in the visitors' lot, joining the steady stream of tourists, mourners, and veterans who made pilgrimages here daily. Rebecca had chosen their attire carefully, conservative, respectful clothing that would blend seamlessly with other cemetery visitors. As they passed through security and entered the grounds, Rebecca felt a profound sense of solemnity. Despite the urgency of their mission, she couldn't help but be moved by the visual testament to sacrifice that surrounded them. Gene seemed similarly affected, his pace slowing as they walked the immaculate paths between markers. Section 60, Rebecca murmured, consulting the cemetery map she had memorized. Southeast portion. We'll approach from the east to avoid the funeral setup. They walked unhurriedly, maintaining the respectful demeanor of legitimate visitors while systematically making their way toward their destination. The summer heat beat down mercilessly, causing perspiration to bead on Rebecca's forehead despite the shade provided by the cemetery's stately trees. Section 60 was more densely visited than other areas, being the final resting place for many who had fallen in recent conflicts. This provided additional cover as Rebecca and Gene moved methodically among the headstones, comparing names and dates to those referenced in the screenplay. There, Gene said quietly, nodding toward a row of markers approximately 30 yards away. The configuration matches the screenplay description. They approached carefully, scanning the area for security personnel or unusual observers. Finding none, they separated slightly, each examining different headstones while maintaining the appearance of paying respects. The screenplay had described 5 specific graves arranged in a distinctive pattern, operatives who had died within months of each other, all with official causes of death that obscured their connection to the Cambodia disaster. Rebecca located the central grave first, Captain Michael Thornton, United States Marine Corps, whose dates aligned perfectly with the timeline of Silver Phoenix. As she knelt beside the marker, ostensibly arranging small flowers she had purchased at the visitor center, her trained eyes meticulously examined every detail of the headstone and surrounding ground. Nothing seemed immediately unusual or out of place. The grave was well maintained, like all others at Arlington, the marble headstone weathered but intact, the surrounding grass recently trimmed. Rebecca felt a momentary wave of doubt. Had they misinterpreted the screenplay's clues, or had Hayden's people already retrieved whatever evidence might have been hidden here? She glanced toward her father, who was examining another of the targeted graves with similar care. Their eyes met briefly, his slight head shake indicating he had found nothing yet, either. Rebecca returned her attention to Thornton's marker, running her fingers lightly across its surface, feeling for any irregularity or hidden compartment. Her pulse quickened as she retrieved a thin tool from her pocket, ostensibly a flower stem separator, but actually a specialized instrument designed for exactly this kind of delicate manipulation. With practiced fingers, she applied gentle pressure to the hidden panel. It resisted momentarily, then yielded with a soft click that seemed thunderous in her heightened state of awareness. The compartment was shallow, but adequate for its purpose. Within lay a small waterproof memory card, protected by a custom-fitted silicone casing. Rebecca extracted it swiftly, replacing it with an identical-looking decoy should anyone else come searching. She secured the panel, leaving no trace of her tampering, and rose to her feet with the card concealed in her palm. She moved casually to where Jean stood, bending as if to show him something on another headstone. "I've got it," she murmured. "Memory card, professionally sealed against environmental damage." Jean nodded almost imperceptibly. "Time to leave." 2 men in suits entered the section 30 seconds ago. They're moving methodically through the rows, paying particular attention to these markers. Rebecca risked a glance in the direction her father indicated. Sure enough, 2 men who practically screamed "Federal Agent" were making their way through Section 60, their attention focused on the very graves identified in the screenplay. Their timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone had connected the dots, just as Rebecca and Jean had. "They've anticipated us," Rebecca whispered, keeping her expression solemn and appropriate for the setting. "We need to exit separately. Meet at contingency point B in 1 hour." Jean gave a barely perceptible nod. "Be careful, Beck." "You too, Dad." They separated, each taking different paths toward the cemetery exits. Rebecca maintained a measured pace, resisting the urge to look back or walk faster than a respectful cemetery visitor would. The memory card felt impossibly significant in her pocket, physical evidence that might finally expose a decades-old betrayal and bring justice to those who had died in Cambodia. As she approached the main pathway, Rebecca noticed additional men in dark suits converging on the area, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Hayden had clearly committed significant resources to intercept them. The stakes were even higher than she had realized. Rebecca seamlessly joined a group of tourists, following a guide, allowing herself to be absorbed into their collective movement toward the exit. Her mind raced through contingency plans, calculating routes and timing for reaching the secondary rendezvous point where she would meet her father. What neither Rebecca nor the undercover agents realized was that Tommy Fitzgerald's long game was even more sophisticated than it appeared. The evidence hidden at Arlington was merely the first piece of a carefully constructed puzzle designed to expose not just what had happened in Cambodia in 1987, but how those events connected to current operations and ongoing corruption within the highest echelons of intelligence leadership. The daughter of Gene Hackman had just become the keeper of secrets that could shake the foundations of the intelligence community, secrets that powerful people would kill to protect. As she passed through the cemetery gates, Rebecca Hackman steeled herself for the confrontation that was surely coming. The undercover agents who had tried to intimidate her at that coffee shop had catastrophically underestimated their target. Their attempt to set her up had instead set in motion the very exposure they had sought to prevent. The rendezvous point, a small, family-owned bookstore in Alexandria's historic district, provided the perfect blend of public exposure and private conversation. Rebecca arrived first, browsing casually through the political history section while maintaining situational awareness of all entrances and exits. The memory card felt impossibly significant in her pocket, a small object carrying the weight of deadly secrets. She had already created a duplicate as insurance, concealing the copy in a location known only to her. 20 minutes later, Gene Hackman entered, his distinctive features partially obscured by a simple cap and glasses, not enough to completely disguise his famous visage, but sufficient to prevent immediate recognition by casual observers. He acknowledged Rebecca with the briefest nod before selecting a book and settling into a reading nook positioned to observe the store's main entrance. Rebecca joined him after a calculated delay, sitting across from him with her own selected volume. To any observer, they appeared to be two strangers sharing a reading space, occasionally exchanging pleasantries about their respective books. "The cemetery?" Rebecca asked quietly, pretending to comment on her reading material. "Clean exit," Gene confirmed, though they were expanding the search perimeter as I left. "Your suspicion about Hayden committing resources was correct. I counted at least 8 operatives coordinating through communication devices." He paused, turning a page deliberately. "And our evidence?" "I may have a solution," Gene replied. "An old contact from my enemy of the state days, technical consultant who became somewhat paranoid about government surveillance after working on that film, maintains a completely isolated system specifically designed for sensitive material. Can we trust him?" Gene considered this. Trust is a strong word in our current situation. Let's say he has no love for intelligence agencies, overstepping their bounds, and he owes me a significant favor. More importantly, he values his privacy above all else. He won't risk exposure by betraying us. Rebecca weighed their limited options. They needed to view the memory card's contents promptly, and every passing hour increased the risk of interception. "Make the call," she decided, "but we approach with full precautions." While Gene arranged the meeting from a burner phone in the bookstore's restroom, Rebecca monitored the street outside, alert for any sign of surveillance. Her attention was drawn to a news alert on her secure phone. Daniel Weiss, the producer who had hired her to investigate Meridian Productions, had been hospitalized following an apparent home invasion. The official report cited random violence, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. When Gene returned, she showed him the news item. His expression darkened. "They're eliminating loose ends," he observed grimly. "We need to assume Eleanor Fitzgerald is also at risk, if she hasn't been approached already." "I had the same thought," Rebecca replied. "I've asked the contact at the U.S. Marshal Service to check on her discreetly, someone who owes me a favor and won't generate official paperwork. But our priority has to be the memory card. If it contains what we think it does, it's our best leverage for protecting everyone involved." They departed separately, using different routes to reach the address Gene's contact had provided, a converted warehouse in an industrial section of Alexandria. The building appeared abandoned from the exterior, its windows darkened and its loading docks empty, but sophisticated surveillance equipment monitored every approach. They were admitted through a service entrance after a series of security protocols that impressed even Rebecca. Gene's contact, who introduced himself only as Smith, was a wiry man in his 60s, with alert eyes behind thick glasses and a manner that balanced technical precision with social awkwardness. His workspace occupied the warehouse's central area, a technological fortress surrounded by signal jamming equipment, independent power sources, and multiple physical and digital security layers. "Quite the setup," Rebecca commented, surveying the impressive array of custom-built systems. "Necessary precautions," Smith replied, not looking up from the specialized computer he was preparing, especially when dealing with potentially classified material being examined by unauthorized civilians. He glanced meaningfully at the memory card Rebecca had placed on his workstation. "That looks military-grade, waterproof, shock-resistant, with physical encryption. Your friend must have had significant resources." "He had significant motivation," Gene responded. "Can you access it?" Smith adjusted his glasses. "I designed systems that could break into exactly this kind of storage during my consulting days. The government doesn't change its encryption protocols as often as it should." His fingers moved with practiced efficiency across specialized keyboards and interfaces. "This will take approximately 20 minutes. I suggest you prepare yourselves. Whatever's on this drive, someone clearly doesn't want it found. Even with compelling evidence, we're dealing with a deputy director of the CIA, Rebecca noted. He'll have contingencies, connections in Justice Department, ways to discredit or suppress whatever we discover. Jean nodded thoughtfully. Which is why we need multiple channels for release if necessary, not just official investigative routes, but media contacts, congressional oversight. I have people I trust in both spheres, Rebecca confirmed, but we need to be strategic about approach. Once we move, Hayden will respond with everything he has. Their discussion was interrupted by Smith's voice. You should see this, he said, his tone unusually grave even for his serious demeanor. The encryption was sophisticated but consistent with protocols from the late 2000s and 10s, likely when Fitzgerald prepared this material. They moved to his workstation, where multiple screens displayed the memory card's contents. It contained a methodically organized collection of documents, photographs, audio files, and personal journals, all meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced with a precision that spoke to years of careful compilation. Fitzgerald didn't leave anything to chance, Rebecca observed, scanning the index. He built a comprehensive case. The evidence was damning and specific. Official operational plans for Silver Phoenix showed last-minute personnel changes, authorized by then-Field Officer Marshall Hayden, reassigning experienced agents and replacing them with less qualified team members. Communication logs revealed crucial intelligence about security vulnerabilities at the extraction site, transmitted through Hayden's office to unknown recipients hours before the operation commenced. Financial records tracked substantial payments from shell companies with Soviet connections to offshore accounts linked to Hayden in the months surrounding the failed mission. Most disturbing were the death certificates and autopsy reports for 3 CIA officers who had raised concerns about the operation's compromise. All had died under questionable circumstances in the years following Cambodia, their deaths classified as accidents or health-related despite suspicious inconsistencies documented by Fitzgerald. He wasn't just building a case against Hayden for Cambodia, Rebecca realized, the implications becoming increasingly clear. He was documenting a pattern of betrayal and cover-up spanning decades. And he's maintained those connections throughout his career, Rebecca added, noting more recent documentation linking Hayden to Russian intelligence figures. The Cambodia operation wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a decades-long pattern of compromised operations and strategic information being sold to the highest bidder. Smith, who had been monitoring external security systems while they examined the evidence, suddenly straightened. We have a situation, he announced tersely. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north and east entrances. Professional deployment pattern, communications blackout just activated in this sector. Rebecca moved immediately to the surveillance monitors. 8 black SUVs with government plates were establishing a perimeter around the warehouse. Tactical teams in unmarked body armor were assuming position at all exits. Hayden found us, she said grimly, and he's not taking any chances. Jean turned to Smith. Is there another way out? The technician nodded, already activating a sequence on a hidden panel. Contingency exit through the sewage tunnels. Unpleasant but effective. I built this place specifically to avoid government entrapment. He handed Rebecca a specialized drive. Complete copy of your memory card contents, plus my system's authentication protocols to verify the data hasn't been tampered with. As Smith led them toward the hidden exit, Rebecca felt a surge of determination. The undercover agents who had attempted to intimidate her had inadvertently set in motion exactly what they had sought to prevent, the exposure of crimes far greater than she had initially suspected. What began as an investigation into a canceled film production had uncovered a traitor operating at the highest levels of American intelligence for nearly 40 years. Now, with evidence in hand and Hayden's forces closing in, the true confrontation was about to begin. Gene Hackman's daughter had not only caught the undercover agents in their act, she had followed the thread to a conspiracy that would shake the foundations of the intelligence community. The sewage tunnels beneath Alexandria lived up to Smith's warning, dank, claustrophobic passageways dating back to infrastructure improvements made in the 1970s. Rebecca led their small group through the labyrinth, guided by directions Smith had hastily provided before sealing the hidden entrance behind them. The sounds of the tactical team breaching the warehouse echoed distantly through the concrete channels, confirming the narrowness of their escape. 2 more left turns, then a maintenance ladder should lead to a storm drain in the commercial district, Rebecca instructed, her voice hushed despite the distance they'd put between themselves and their pursuers. The specialized drive containing Fitzgerald's evidence was secured in a waterproof pouch against her body. Its contents now representing not just justice for a decades-old betrayal, but potentially the most significant intelligence scandal since Aldrich Ames. Gene followed closely, moving with remarkable agility for his age, though Rebecca noticed his breathing had become more labored in the tunnel's stale air. Smith brought up the rear, constantly checking a handheld device that monitored radio frequencies and cellular activity in their vicinity. "They've established a 5-block search perimeter," Smith reported tersely. "Standard urban containment protocol. They'll have eyes on transportation hubs, traffic cameras, and facial recognition active at all major intersections." "Then we avoid those entirely," Rebecca decided, reaching the maintenance ladder. She ascended carefully, pushing aside the heavy drain cover to survey their emergence point. They had reached a service alley behind a row of restaurants, currently empty, save for stacked supply crates and dumpsters. "Clear for now. We need to separate immediately. Divided targets are harder to track." Gene nodded grimly. "Agreed. What's our next move?" "We need a secure location to formulate a distribution strategy for the evidence," Rebecca replied, helping him climb the final rungs of the ladder. "Someone with enough authority and independence to withstand pressure from Hayden, even with his connections." "I might know someone," Smith interjected, his normally reserved manner giving way to genuine concern. "Former Oversight Committee member, retired, but still connected. Incorruptible reputation. Lives about 30 miles from here." Rebecca considered this briefly. "Make the call, but use maximum security protocols. Hayden will have assets monitoring all communications related to his known adversaries." As Smith moved away to place the call from a specialized device, Rebecca turned to her father. "You should consider extracting to a secure location. Your involvement makes you a high-value target, and your visibility creates additional risk." Gene Hackman's expression hardened with familiar determination, the same intensity that had defined his most memorable performances. "I've been keeping other people's secrets my entire career, Beck. I watched those intelligence officers fawn over me, show me their operations, treat me like some kind of celebrity mascot while they were selling out their own colleagues. I'm seeing this through." Before Rebecca could respond, Smith returned, his expression unusually animated. "Connection established. My contact will meet us, but we need to move immediately. She's arranging temporary security through private channels." They emerged from the alley cautiously, adopting the casual demeanor of restaurant workers, leaving their shift. The commercial district bustled with early evening activity, providing useful cover as they navigated toward the extraction point Smith had arranged. A church parking lot 3 blocks away, where a volunteer driver from his extensive network of privacy advocates would be waiting. "Stay alert for watchers," Rebecca cautioned as they walked. Hayden would have deployed plainclothes operatives throughout the area. Look for individuals who appear too attentive, anyone speaking into communications devices or surveillance patterns like parked vehicles with occupants. They had covered approximately 2 blocks when Gene suddenly slowed his pace, his attention caught by something across the street. "Don't react, obviously, but there's a familiar face at your 2 o'clock. The coffee shop operative, the one who called himself Wilson." Rebecca casually adjusted her hair, using the movement to scan in the indicated direction. Sure enough, the man who had attempted to entrap her sat at an outdoor cafe, apparently engrossed in a newspaper but positioned with clear sightlines to major pedestrian thoroughfares. His positioning was too perfect to be coincidental. "They've anticipated our escape routes," she observed quietly. "We need to adjust." She scanned their surroundings, identifying an alternative approach that would circumvent the watcher's field of vision. "Through the bookstore, out the back. There's an employee exit that connects to the next block." Smith nodded, already drifting in that direction without breaking stride. Gene followed, maintaining the natural demeanor of a casual shopper while keeping the operative in his peripheral vision. They entered the bookstore separately, browsing different sections to avoid appearing as a group. Rebecca made her way toward the rear of the store, past shelves of travel guides and local interest publications. A staff-only door stood partially ajar, leading to a stockroom beyond. She slipped through without attracting attention, finding herself among shelves of inventory and shipping materials. The exit she sought was visible on the far wall, its emergency bar promising silent egress. As she waited for Jean and Smith to join her, Rebecca's secured phone vibrated with an incoming message. The contact she had asked to check on Eleanor Fitzgerald had finally responded. Subject relocated to secure location. Evidence of surveillance and attempted approach by unidentified operatives. She brought documents. Important development. Confirm when safe. The message confirmed Rebecca's suspicions that Fitzgerald's widow remained a key figure in this unfolding conspiracy. Whatever additional information she possessed could potentially strengthen their case against Hayden. Rebecca made a mental note to establish contact with Eleanor once they had secured their current evidence. Jean and Smith arrived moments later, slipping through the employee door in quick succession. Together, they exited through the emergency door, emerging into a narrow service passage that connected to an adjacent street. Clear, Rebecca confirmed after scanning the new area. The church lot is 1 block east. They proceeded with cautious efficiency, maintaining separation while keeping each other in sight. The church parking lot appeared ordinary, a modest asphalt expanse half filled with vehicles belonging to evening program attendees. Smith led them toward a gray sedan parked near the rear exit, its unremarkable appearance perfect for their needs. The driver, a middle-aged woman with a professor's demeanor, asked no questions as they entered the vehicle, merely nodding at Smith's murmured confirmation code before pulling away from the lot with careful precision. She navigated a complex series of turns and doublings, back designed to reveal any pursuit, eventually merging onto the highway heading southwest from Alexandria. 30 minutes to our destination, she informed them, her eyes constantly checking the mirrors. No indication of surveillance, but we'll maintain evasive protocols throughout the journey. As they traveled, Rebecca used the relative security of the moving vehicle to examine her copy of Fitzgerald's evidence more thoroughly, using a specialized tablet Smith provided. The depth of documentation was even more impressive upon closer examination. Fitzgerald had constructed an airtight case that would withstand the most rigorous scrutiny. Financial transfers were documented with account numbers and transaction records. Operational compromise was established through side-by-side comparison of classified intelligence and intercepted Soviet communications. Personnel reassignments showed clear patterns of vulnerable operatives being positioned for maximum exposure. Most damning were Hayden's subsequent career advancements, each following operations where American intelligence suffered inexplicable setbacks, while Hayden's offshore accounts received substantial deposits from shell companies linked to foreign interests. This goes beyond the Cold War, Rebecca observed, connecting the patterns across decades. Hayden transitioned seamlessly from Soviet payoffs to Russian, then expanded to private interests, defense contractors, technology firms developing classified systems. He wasn't just a traitor to his country, he was an enterprise of betrayal. Jean leaned closer, examining the documentation with growing indignation, all while building a reputation as an intelligence stalwart. The awards, the commendations, the trusted advisory positions, all while he was selling out his own people. Which explains the extreme response to the screenplay, Rebecca concluded. Fitzgerald designed it as a triggering mechanism. Once Blackwater Rising gained attention, investigators would eventually connect its fictional narrative to the real Cambodia operation. From there, the path would lead to Arlington, to the evidence, and finally to Hayden himself, just as we've done. The sedan turned onto a private road, winding through densely wooded property toward a secluded residence set back from the main highway. Security measures were visible but discreet. Cameras concealed in landscaping elements, strategic lighting designed to eliminate approach blind spots, reinforced entry points. As they pulled into the circular driveway, Rebecca spotted a slender woman in her 60s waiting on the porch, her posture suggesting both authority and vigilance. Smith's contact, the former oversight committee member who might represent their best hope for official action against a corrupt deputy director. What Rebecca couldn't possibly know was that this woman had her own history with Marshall Hayden, a professional rivalry dating back decades, fueled by her early, unheeded warnings about his suspicious activities. For her, this meeting represented not just a matter of national security, but the vindication of concerns that had once nearly destroyed her own career. The undercover agents who had tried to intimidate Gene Hackman's daughter had inadvertently set in motion a reckoning 40 years in the making, bringing together the very people most motivated and capable of exposing their master's betrayal. Smith's contact introduced herself simply as Judge Faraday, her clipped tone and penetrating gaze reflecting decades in positions requiring rapid assessment of both people and situations. She ushered them inside with minimal pleasantries, securing multiple locks behind them, before leading the group to a wood-paneled study equipped with communication systems that rivaled Smith's warehouse setup. "You have 15 minutes to convince me this isn't an elaborate waste of my time," she announced, settling behind an imposing desk. Margaret Faraday, former FISA court judge and Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committee senior counsel. Smith vouches for you, which buys you the 15 minutes. The rest is up to you. Rebecca appreciated the direct approach. She placed the specialized drive on the desk and launched into a concise summary of their investigation and findings, emphasizing the comprehensive nature of Fitzgerald's evidence and its implications for national security. Gene occasionally interjected with details of his historical perspective, describing his interactions with the intelligence community during his acting research and the origins of his knowledge about the Cambodia operation. Judge Faraday listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When they finished their explanation, she examined the drive for several moments before connecting it to an isolated computer system built into her desk. "I'm familiar with Marshal Hayden," she stated as the files loaded, her tone carefully neutral. "Our professional paths crossed numerous times during my tenure on the Oversight Committee. I found his explanations for certain operational failures unconvincing. But suspicion isn't evidence, and Hayden has powerful allies throughout Washington." Rebecca nodded. "That's precisely why we brought this to you instead of regular law enforcement channels. Hayden would have assets in place to intercept or discredit the information before it reached anyone with authority to act." "A reasonable assessment," Faraday acknowledged, scanning through Fitzgerald's meticulously organized evidence. Her practiced eyes moved rapidly across financial records, operational details, and personnel files, occasionally pausing to examine particular documents more thoroughly. As she progressed, her expression gradually hardened from professional interest to cold anger. "This is more comprehensive than I anticipated," she finally stated, looking up from the screen. "Fitzgerald built a case that would withstand the highest levels of scrutiny. The financial trails alone would trigger multiple federal investigations under normal circumstances." "But these aren't normal circumstances," Gene observed. "Hayden controls significant intelligence resources and has decades of accumulated influence." "Indeed," Faraday tapped thoughtfully on her desk, "which explains the aggressive response to your investigation. Hayden isn't just protecting his reputation or freedom. He's protecting a network of compromised operations and collaborators that likely extends beyond him personally." She turned to Rebecca. "You mentioned Eleanor Fitzgerald is secure but under surveillance?" Rebecca nodded, retrieving her secure phone. "My contact confirmed she's been relocated to a protected location. Apparently, she has additional documents, possibly materials Tommy Fitzgerald kept separate from the Arlington evidence as insurance." "We need to reach her immediately," Faraday decided. "If Hayden's people have identified her as a vulnerability, they won't hesitate to act, regardless of her age or civilian status. We've seen his willingness to eliminate loose ends with Daniel Weiss's home invasion." While Faraday made arrangements through secure channels to establish contact with Eleanor Fitzgerald, Rebecca and Gene conferred quietly about next steps. The evidence they had recovered was substantial, but translating it into actual consequences for Hayden would require navigating treacherous political and bureaucratic waters. "Even with Judge Faraday's assistance, we're facing an uphill battle," Rebecca noted. "Hayden has had decades to embed allies throughout the system and develop contingency plans for exposure." Gene considered this soberly. "Then we need to approach this like Fitzgerald did, create multiple paths to exposure that can't all be blocked simultaneously. Official investigations, media channels, congressional oversight. Hayden might control elements in each, but not all concurrently." "A distributed disclosure strategy," Rebecca agreed. "We prepare packages of evidence tailored to different recipients, set to release simultaneously if any are compromised." Their planning was interrupted as Faraday returned, her expression even more grim than before. "My contact with the Marshal's Service confirms Eleanor Fitzgerald is secure for now, but reports increased activity around her protection detail. Hayden appears to be leveraging Justice Department connections to question the necessity of her protection, arguing she's merely a potential witness in an internal review, not a person at risk. He's laying groundwork to access her legally, Rebecca translated, the implications immediately clear. Once she's in the system, he can control the narrative and isolate her from outside contact. Precisely. Faraday checked her watch. We have perhaps 12 hours before his maneuvering bears fruit. Whatever Eleanor Fitzgerald knows or possesses, we need it integrated into our strategy before Hayden's people reach her. Their discussion was interrupted by a security alert on Faraday's system, a vehicle approaching the property through the wooded access road. The judge moved swiftly to a monitoring station, activating exterior cameras that revealed a silver sedan proceeding cautiously toward the residence. Not one of mine, she confirmed tensely, reaching for what appeared to be a concealed weapon, and not using established approach protocols. Rebecca joined her at the monitors, studying the vehicle's approach. Single occupant, female, approximately 65 to 70 years old, not tactical positioning or driving pattern. She zoomed the camera, focusing on the driver's face. Wait, I recognize her from Fitzgerald's files. That's Eleanor Fitzgerald. Faraday verified through enhanced imaging, then nodded in confirmation. But how did she find this location, and why approach directly instead of through established channels? Perhaps the same way Hayden's people have been anticipating our moves, Jean suggested grimly. Someone in her protection detail must be compromised. The implications were immediate and disturbing. If Eleanor Fitzgerald had fled her supposed protection, believing herself at risk from those assigned to guard her, the corruption in official channels might be even more extensive than they had suspected. Moreover, her arrival at this specific location suggested either remarkable intuition or precise information about their movements. Neither scenario was particularly reassuring. Rebecca made an immediate decision. We need to bring her in quickly before she's exposed on the approach road. If she's being tracked, we have minutes at most before Hayden's operatives follow her trail here. Faraday concurred, activating additional security measures throughout the property while directing her driver to escort Eleanor Fitzgerald inside through a secondary entrance designed specifically for rapid, concealed access. Within moments, the elderly widow of Tommy Fitzgerald was ushered into the study, clutching a weathered leather portfolio to her chest with determined hands. I know who you are, she said without preamble, her gaze moving from Rebecca to Jean with surprising intensity. Tommy said eventually someone would follow the trail he left. He hoped it would be someone with both the skills and the moral courage to finish what he started. She placed the portfolio on Faraday's desk. This completes his case against Marshal Hayden. As Eleanor Fitzgerald opened the portfolio, revealing documents, photographs, and storage devices nestled in custom compartments, she explained her presence with remarkable composure. When federal marshals suddenly appeared at my home this morning, I knew Tommy's contingency protocol had been triggered. He warned me years ago that if certain people ever took an unusual interest in my protection, it actually meant I was in danger from those same people. She withdrew a sealed envelope, handing it directly to Rebecca. Tommy left instructions that this should go to whoever found his Arlington evidence. He said that person would have proven themselves capable and committed regardless of the risk. Her eyes, sharp with intelligence despite her age, studied Rebecca carefully. He would have approved of Gene Hackman's daughter being that person, a family that understands both storytelling and truth. Rebecca accepted the envelope with a sense of profound responsibility. The undercover agents who had attempted to intimidate her had unwittingly set in motion exactly the scenario Tommy Fitzgerald had designed, bringing together the evidence, expertise, and authority necessary to expose a traitor who had operated with impunity for 4 decades. As she unsealed the envelope, Rebecca realized they had entered the most dangerous phase of their confrontation with Hayden. With Eleanor Fitzgerald's arrival, they had consolidated all the evidence and witnesses in one location. They represented not just a threat to Hayden's freedom and reputation, but to the entire network of compromise and corruption he had built throughout his career. The final confrontation was approaching rapidly, and Hayden would deploy every resource at his disposal to silence them before the truth could emerge. The trap the undercover agents had tried to set for Gene Hackman's daughter had transformed into a race against time, one where the stakes had escalated from personal intimidation to a matter of national security and justice, 40 years delayed. The envelope contained a single handwritten letter and a small key. Rebecca read Tommy Fitzgerald's words carefully, her expression growing increasingly focused as she absorbed his final instructions. The letter detailed specific contingency plans he had developed during his years of meticulous evidence gathering, plans designed to overcome the very obstacles they now faced. He anticipated everything, Rebecca said, looking up from the letter, including Hayden's likely responses once the evidence was discovered. This key opens a safety deposit box at First National in Georgetown containing additional insurance, evidence he distributed to various secure locations, accessible only with specific authentication protocols. Eleanor Fitzgerald nodded. Tommy understood his adversary better than anyone. He worked alongside Hayden for decades, observing his methods, identifying his weaknesses, all while building the case against him. He knew Hayden would never stop at legal means once truly threatened. Which explains the comprehensive approach to evidence distribution, Judge Faraday observed, examining the portfolio's contents. Fitzgerald created a fail-safe system where no single point of vulnerability could compromise the entire case. The portfolio contained what Eleanor described as the connecting tissue between isolated incidents, the evidence that transformed individual suspicious activities into a pattern of treason spanning 4 decades. Most significant were records of Hayden's transition from Soviet handlers to post-Cold War Russian intelligence, including coded communications and meeting protocols that continued well into the present decade. Hayden wasn't just a Cold War relic continuing old habits, Rebecca realized scanning the documents. He evolved with geopolitical realities, offering his services to the highest bidders in an increasingly complex intelligence marketplace. Russian interests, Chinese military intelligence, even private military contractors seeking classified operational details. And his position gave him access to everything, Jean added grimly. Operational plans, agent identities, technology capabilities, each piece worth millions to the right buyers. Eleanor confirmed this assessment. Tommy identified at least 38 operations compromised between 1990 and 2018, resulting in the deaths of 22 American operatives and countless foreign assets. The financial trails all lead back to Hayden through sophisticated but ultimately traceable channels. As they consolidated this new evidence with their existing materials, Judge Faraday's security system issued another alert, multiple vehicles approaching from different access points using tactical formation. The monitors showed 3 black SUVs advancing rapidly through the wooded property, their approach suggesting professional coordination. "Hayden found us," Faraday stated, her tone factual rather than alarmed. She activated additional security protocols, sealing reinforced shutters over the windows and initiating what appeared to be a communications blackout sequence. "We have approximately 7 minutes before they breach the perimeter, perhaps 12 before they penetrate the structure itself." Rebecca made an immediate assessment. "We need to implement Fitzgerald's distribution protocol now. If they capture or destroy the physical evidence, the case against Hayden collapses." They moved with practiced efficiency, Rebecca and Smith preparing data packages from the combined evidence, while Jean and Eleanor organized the physical documents. Judge Faraday accessed a hidden security room adjoining her study, revealing communications equipment specifically designed to operate during signal jamming or network disruptions. "Military-grade bypass systems," she explained tersely. "From my oversight committee days, independent satellite uplink that can't be blocked without resources beyond even Hayden's reach." Rebecca quickly outlined their approach. 3 parallel distribution channels, official Justice Department connections through Faraday's established protocols, media outlets through encrypted drops to journalists with proven records of source protection, and congressional oversight through direct secure transmission to multiple committee members simultaneously. "What about the physical evidence?" Jean asked, indicating the documents and storage devices they had accumulated. "If Hayden's team seizes it during the raid, they'll know exactly what we've discovered and who we've contacted." "We utilize Fitzgerald's final contingency," Rebecca decided, referencing the letter, "a temporary surrender strategy." She explained swiftly as they continued preparations, tactical teams now visible on the property's edge. "We allow Hayden's team to capture what appears to be complete evidence, but it actually contains a critical gap, Enough authentic material to be convincing, but missing key connective elements that would allow them to identify and neutralize all distribution channels. A deliberate information leak to occupy them while the real evidence distribution proceeds, Judge Faraday translated, appreciating the strategy's elegance, creating the illusion of containment while actual exposure continues unimpeded. They worked methodically despite the approaching threat, allocating evidence components according to Rebecca's strategy. The most critical connective documents, those that transformed individual suspicious activities into an irrefutable pattern of treason, were digitized and integrated into the distribution packages, while physical copies were concealed in a secret compartment Faraday revealed beneath her desk. 7 decades of judicial paranoia has its advantages, she remarked dryly as she sealed the hidden storage space. This room may be searched a dozen times without revealing this compartment. As the tactical teams reached the outer security perimeter, triggering the first defensive countermeasures, Smith completed the final encryption of their distribution packages. The system confirmed successful transmission through all 3 channels moments before the property's main power was cut, a standard approach for tactical entries. Faraday's backup systems engaged seamlessly, maintaining essential functions while simulating more extensive disruption. They'll believe they've compromised our communications more effectively than they actually have, she noted with professional satisfaction. An understandable error when dealing with outdated intelligence about this property's capabilities. Rebecca positioned herself near the study entrance, listening intently to the methodical progression of the tactical team through the residence's outer defenses. Their approach was textbook federal procedure, controlled, coordinated, and overwhelmingly resourced. Exactly what she would expect from an operation personally directed by someone of Hayden's experience and authority. They're clearing rooms systematically, she reported, recognizing the pattern of movement. 2 minutes at most before they reach this location. Gene moved to stand beside his daughter, his legendary composure evident even in this extreme circumstance. What's our play when they breach? Controlled opposition, Rebecca replied. We resist enough to appear genuine, but ultimately surrender the materials they can see. Judge Faraday requests her attorney and invokes her considerable legal privileges. We appear concerned, but not devastated by the seizure. Eleanor Fitzgerald nodded approvingly. Tommy would appreciate this approach. He always said Hayden's greatest weakness was his absolute confidence in his own superior intelligence. He consistently underestimates his opponents because he cannot imagine being outmaneuvered. The tactical team's approach was now audible through the reinforced door, professional voices coordinating final positions before breach. Rebecca met each person's gaze in turn, confirming their readiness for the performance about to begin. This confrontation would require perfect execution, appearing genuinely outmaneuvered while actually advancing their strategy exactly as planned. When the breach came, it was executed with textbook precision, flashbang deployment, coordinated entry, immediate coverage of all potential threat points within the room. A dozen armed operatives in tactical gear secured the space within seconds, their weapons trained on the occupants with unwavering discipline. Behind them entered a man Rebecca instantly recognized despite never having met him, Deputy Director Marshall Hayden himself, his silver hair and patrician features familiar from news photographs and official CIA publications. His presence at an operational raid spoke volumes about the personal nature of this situation and his assessment of its significance. Hayden surveyed the room with calculating eyes, taking in the assembled group and the evidence visible on Faraday's desk. His expression betrayed momentary surprise at finding Eleanor Fitzgerald among them, quickly masked behind professional composure. Judge Faraday, he acknowledged, with formal courtesy completely at odds with the armed intrusion. I regret the dramatic entrance, but we're conducting a national security operation involving classified intelligence stolen by the individuals you've been harboring. Faraday met his gaze with judicial imperturbability. Deputy Director Hayden, how interesting that you personally lead a tactical team to apprehend alleged intelligence thieves. One might almost suspect a personal interest in this matter. It was the opening move in what would become the final confrontation, Hayden believing he had contained the threat to his decades of treachery, while in reality, the evidence was already moving through channels beyond his control. The undercover agents who had tried to set up Gene Hackman's daughter had instead triggered a sequence that would expose the most damaging intelligence scandal in American history. As tactical officers began collecting the visible evidence, Rebecca caught her father's eye. A lifetime of acting had prepared Gene Hackman perfectly for this performance, appearing defeated while knowing the real victory was already secured. The trap had been reversed, and Hayden had walked directly into it, exactly as Tommy Fitzgerald had planned. Marshal Hayden maintained his facade of official authority as he supervised the collection of evidence, instructing his team with the practiced precision of someone accustomed to command. Document everything meticulously. Chain of custody must be impeccable. His instructions, delivered for the benefit of witnesses present, created a veneer of legitimate national security concerns rather than the desperate cover-up operation it actually was. Judge Faraday had been placed under house arrest within her own study, her formal protests about judicial immunity acknowledged but effectively ignored under the expansive umbrella of national security emergency protocols. Rebecca, Jean, Smith, and Eleanor Fitzgerald were separated and individually guarded, prevented from communicating, while tactical officers continued searching the property for additional evidence. Rebecca observed Hayden's methodical approach with professional appreciation, despite their adversarial positions. He was thorough, leaving nothing to chance, personally inspecting the most significant documents before they were secured in specialized containers. His confidence appeared absolute, the practiced certainty of a man who had successfully navigated countless crises throughout his career. Ms. Hackman, Hayden eventually addressed her directly, approaching with calculated cordiality. Your persistence is remarkable if thoroughly misguided. You've entangled yourself in matters with implications far beyond your understanding. Rebecca met his gaze evenly. I understand perfectly well when someone attempts to intimidate me, Deputy Director. Your undercover operatives miscalculated significantly when they approached me at that coffee shop. Something flickered briefly in Hayden's eyes, perhaps surprise at her direct confrontation or acknowledgement of the tactical error that had accelerated this situation. A regrettable approach in retrospect. We initially sought only to determine your knowledge about potentially classified information appearing in a screenplay. Your disproportionate response escalated matters unnecessarily. Disproportionate? Rebecca allowed genuine indignation to color her tone. Your agents implied threats against me and my father, conducted surveillance of my home, and likely orchestrated an accident for my client. What proportionate response would you suggest to such actions, Deputy Director? Hayden's expression remained impassive, but Rebecca detected the slight tension in his posture that suggested controlled anger. National security operations occasionally require unpleasant measures, Ms. Hackman, but I assure you, no one would have been harmed had you simply cooperated with initial inquiries. From across the room, Gene Hackman's distinctive voice cut through the tension. Like no one was harmed in Cambodia in 1987? Or the 3 agents who raised concerns afterward, or the dozens of operatives compromised over the following decades? His legendary intensity remained undiminished by age, each question landing with the precision of an actor who had spent a lifetime making words matter. Hayden turned slowly toward Gene, his composure noticeably strained. Mr. Hackman, your distinguished career does not grant you access to classified information or the expertise to evaluate complex intelligence operations. This misguided crusade places you in significant legal jeopardy. I've faced scarier villains in my films, Hayden, Gene replied evenly. At least those were fictional. You've spent 40 years betraying your country and sending American agents to their deaths for personal profit. That performance deserves recognition, though not the kind you've been receiving at agency award ceremonies. The exchange was interrupted by a tactical officer approaching Hayden with urgent information, delivered in a hushed tone that nonetheless carried enough for Rebecca to discern the content. Sir, we've completed the evidence inventory. It appears comprehensive, but... Hayden moved away to continue the conversation privately, his body language betraying growing concern as the officer continued his report. Rebecca exchanged glances with Judge Faraday, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. The first signs of doubt were emerging in Hayden's operation, the realization that something wasn't aligning with expectations. 30 minutes passed in tense silence as the tactical team completed their work, securing all visible evidence and conducting final searches of the property. Rebecca noted with professional satisfaction that they had failed to discover Faraday's hidden compartment containing the crucial connecting documents, exactly as anticipated. Hayden eventually returned to the study, his expression now carefully controlled, but with tension evident around his eyes. "Judge Faraday, you and your guests will remain under house detention pending further investigation. Communications blackout will continue, and agents will remain on site to ensure compliance. I trust you understand the seriousness of your situation." Faraday responded with the calm certainty of someone who had faced down far more intimidating adversaries across her judicial career. "I understand perfectly that you're conducting an extrajudicial operation against a former federal judge and oversight committee member, deputy director. I also understand the constitutional implications and the personal liability you're assuming. The question is whether you do." As Hayden departed with the secured evidence, leaving a reduced security team to maintain their detention, Rebecca caught the brief glance he directed toward Eleanor Fitzgerald, a look containing equal parts contempt and concern. Tommy Fitzgerald's widow returned his gaze with quiet satisfaction, the culmination of her husband's decades-long pursuit of justice finally unfolding. The next 12 hours passed in carefully monitored isolation. The remaining security team maintained professional distance, revealing nothing about developments beyond their immediate assignment. Rebecca used the time to observe their routines, identifying potential weaknesses while maintaining the appearance of resigned cooperation. It was precisely 3:17 a.m. when the first indications of their strategy's success emerged. The security team's communications devices activated simultaneously, multiple voices demanding status updates and new instructions. The controlled professionalism gave way to increasing urgency, culminating in an immediate withdrawal order that sent agents scrambling to establish a new security perimeter around the property. Judge Faraday, who had been monitoring developments through her own channels, allowed herself a small smile. "Right on schedule. The evidence packages have reached their destinations, and initial verification has confirmed authenticity. The Justice Department's Internal Affairs Division has launched a priority investigation into Hayden, and congressional oversight committees have been formally notified." Rebecca nodded, calculating the cascading implications. Hayden's realizing the evidence he seized wasn't complete, that the real operation was happening concurrently with his raid. He's switching to containment mode now, trying to identify all potential exposure points simultaneously. "An impossibility," Eleanor Fitzgerald stated with quiet certainty. "Tommy created too many independent vectors. Stopping one or even several won't prevent the complete exposure. Marshall Hayden is experiencing what Tommy called terminal inevitability, the moment when a lifetime of manipulation collapses under its own weight." By morning, the security team had been replaced by representatives from the Justice Department's Inspector General Office and FBI Counterintelligence Division, agencies with specific authority to investigate potential misconduct within intelligence services. Their approach was markedly different, professional but respectful, acknowledging Faraday's status and treating the group as witnesses rather than suspects. The lead investigator, a seasoned FBI veteran named Harris, provided their first official update. Deputy Director Hayden was placed on administrative leave at 4:30 a.m. following preliminary review of evidence suggesting serious misconduct. His residence and offices are currently being searched under federal warrant. I've been authorized to inform you that your cooperation in this matter is being recognized at the highest levels." Rebecca exchanged glances with her father, both recognizing the carefully worded statement for what it was, confirmation that their evidence distribution had triggered precisely the response they had intended. The system was responding to Hayden's betrayal with the full weight of its investigative authority. Throughout the day, news reports began emerging, initially vague references to developments concerning senior intelligence leadership, gradually evolving into more specific coverage of a major counterintelligence investigation. By evening, Hayden's name had appeared in multiple outlets, along with references to historic allegations of compromised operations and possible foreign intelligence connections. 1 week later, Rebecca Hackman stood beside her father on the steps of the Justice Department following their formal debriefing with a multi-agency task force assembled to unravel Hayden's 4 decades of betrayal. The evidence they had helped expose had proven even more extensive than anticipated, revealing a network of compromised operations and officials that extended beyond Hayden himself. Daniel Weiss called from the hospital, Rebecca told her father as they descended the steps, Production on Blackwater Rising has been authorized to resume, though with significant script revisions to protect operational details that remain sensitive. He's offered you a role again. Gene Hackman smiled, the familiar wry expression that had endeared him to generations of moviegoers. I think I've had enough real-world espionage to last me. Besides, I'm rather enjoying watching my daughter's performance. You caught them in the act, Beck, exactly as Tommy Fitzgerald hoped someone would. Rebecca nodded, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with undercover agents attempting to intimidate her in a coffee shop. Their fundamental miscalculation, assuming Gene Hackman's daughter would be easily manipulated, had triggered the exposure of America's most damaging intelligence scandal since the Cold War. They thought I was just trading on your name, she observed. They never considered I might have inherited your determination to see justice done. As they reached the street, Eleanor Fitzgerald was waiting, Tommy's weathered portfolio tucked under her arm, like a final connection to her husband's life work. He would have appreciated the symmetry, she told them quietly. A great actor who brought truth to his roles, and his daughter who brought truth to reality. Together, you accomplished what Tommy spent his life preparing for, proving that no betrayal, no matter how powerful the betrayer, can remain hidden forever. The undercover agents who had tried to set up Gene Hackman's daughter had inadvertently become catalysts for justice 40 years delayed. Their attempt to intimidate Rebecca had instead revealed the daughter of a legend to be every bit as formidable as her father, capable of turning their trap against them and exposing the very conspiracy they had sought to protect. In doing so, she had honored not just her father's legacy, but the principle that had defined both their careers, the unwavering pursuit of truth, regardless of the cost.